On your Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors are in a bit of a weird funk to begin the season at 12-12, and I feel like a lot of folks are having a hard time figuring out what exactly to expect from this team over the course of the year. So that's the problem we're going to work to solve today as we try to lay out actual hard expectations for you to frame your reactions around with our pal Katie Heindl on another Whatevs Wednesday on the show. It's all coming up. Thanks so much for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1296 of Locked On Raptors for Wednesday, December the 7th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons across various platforms. You can find all of my work over at Woodley Sean on Twitter. You can follow the podcast on Twitter as well, at Locked On Raptors, and you can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps. You can also go to YouTube and hit the big, fat, red subscribe button. You can't miss it. It's as red as this wonderful Toronto Raptors Santa hat I have appearing on the broadcast here on video. Just hit it and you've supported the show as we get closer to 3,000 subs over there on the tube. It's much appreciated. All right, on today's show, it's another Whatevs Wednesday, and we missed last week's because I was traveling the wilds of Utah for a little work trip to meet my Locked On coworkers, which was lovely. And this week, Katie Heindl is traveling the wilds of Northern Ontario with a bit of a suspect internet connection. So instead of video, you get a wonderful basketball with a cowboy hat, as is Katie's tradition whenever I do Zoom podcasts or video podcasts with her, dating all the way back to the early days of Locked On Raptors when that was her Skype handle or Skype avatar or whatever we're talking about. Katie, how the hell are you?
I'm good, man. I forgot that we used to do that on Skype because this is still my Skype avatar.
Yeah, very early Locked On Raptors days and your early appearances on the show. I vividly remember having to record these sort of sketchy Zoom recordings where I'm pretty sure I used to angle my microphone over top of my computer speakers in order to pick up the sound because I was not at all acquainted with how to properly record audio back in the day. It's gotten a lot more sophisticated since then. We have a mic arm with a Santa hat on it. I don't know what else. We've come all the way, I think, from the depths. But nice to have a reminder of the OG days with basketball with a cowboy hat. This could easily be a Dallas Mavericks. If you're watching the video, it could easily be the Dallas Mavericks mascot, right? It kind of looks almost like Mavs Man and a basketball with a cowboy hat kind of came together into one weird sort of sick creation, no?
But does Mavs Man have a little bandit or burglar high band? I think that's what this guy's wearing.
Yeah, I let me look. Yeah, it's kind of like Mavs Man and the Hamburglar got together, I suppose, is what we're looking at here. As I look up a photo of Mavs Man, again, not doing it on my computer. He has glasses. He has very thick athletic sunglasses, so kind of close, I guess. Either way, Katie, it's lovely to have you on the show. On today's show, I wanted to kind of do a bit of an exercise because I feel like a big reason for a lot of the angst around the Toronto Raptors 12-12 start this year has to do with just kind of not really knowing where to direct your feelings about the things happening on the floor. And usually the way that I, as a sports fan, kind of engage with the team over the course of a season is I know what the expectations are at the start of the year, and then based on how the team performs in relation to said expectations, I get angry or sad or happy or whatever, or I say, oh, this is fine. And I don't feel like this Raptors team has ever really had expectations set for it. Normally the front office does a pretty good job of kind of laying out what their goals for their season are. I don't really think they did that this year in the same way they have in recent years. I think last year was very much, I don't know what the expectations are. Let's see. Maybe they're kind of low, but we're going to try some weird stuff, and that's going to be what the season's about. And I think they fulfilled that. Year before that, it felt to me like that was supposed to be the last year, the last hurrah for Kyle Lowry. That didn't quite work out, obviously, because COVID and Tampa had other plans, but that was the vision going into the year. and maintained that way until COVID sort of sapped the team in the middle of the season. Year before that, I think it was pretty clear we're going to go defend the title nobly without Kawhi Leonard. Year before that was pretty clear we're going to try to win the title with Kawhi Leonard. Year before that, I think it was pretty clear to sort of revamp the team, address the issues that LeBron had exposed, and beat LeBron. Didn't work out so hot, but like we knew what the expectations were. I don't, Katie, feel like we've ever kind of got a set read on what the expectations for this year's Raptors team are. Do you agree with that? Like, do you feel like that's been something missing from the early part of this season? And do you think it has in any way sort of bled into the way that people are reacting to the team and its ups and downs?
It's kind of tricky because I think there was a little bit of a lack, though a necessary expectation last season, because you've got Scotty Barnes coming in versus Achua, starting to kind of figure out what his roles with the team. Same with Gary, Fred and Pascal stepping into leadership roles. So I think the expectation for last season was loose, right? Like, let's see what we've got. So we don't know what we need until we see what we've got. But I feel like that has bled over into this season that I didn't necessarily anticipate. I was listening to you and Vivek yesterday, and I thought what Vivek said was pretty astute in terms of, he was just talking about like schemes, but that why does the team need to relearn defensive schemes if these are just the same as last season and like the same people, right? No, you have a couple new guys, but otherwise, like, it shouldn't be this. There wasn't an overhaul. It wasn't something you have to go and relearn. So I think it's still unclear, though. Like, I don't know that there's a good reason for that, because at the beginning of this season, Masai Ujiri told everybody in the Raptors day presser, like, the expectation is winning. It's always winning. We want to win games. We want to build a team here at home. That's what we're trying to location is with Scotty Barnes and like the guys you've already kind of trained up through this system, that they're the ones that are going to bring it. So that he's always said what the expect is. There's obviously a discrepancy in expectation versus execution, which again is natural and normal.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to say is, like, I don't feel there's some big anomaly or like we're way off base. But there's like some roster juggling. There's some contract stuff up in the air that I think lends to expectations of like who should have the biggest role in the team, because I think a lot of guys right now are trying to prove that they can have a big role because they want a big contract. Last factors sort of adding into it, which I don't think is helping. But the expectation for this season was never like get to the finals. It's probably get out of the first round. I thought that was kind of clear.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I don't think, if you're reasonable, I don't think finals or even conference finals were, I think a realistic expectation, right? I know some people, kind of viewed the team and were a little higher on it from the jump. And look, nothing about this start to the season has changed how high I am on this team, like long term. I think, things are going to be pretty all right and pretty rosy for the next little while here, health provided and all that stuff. They've got a pretty good thing in terms of like the core of it going. But yeah, it does feel weird this year because I think, it's complicated by the fact that they won 48 games last year, right? And expectation is often the thief of joy. And some of the most fun seasons last year, I think the title defense season where no one expected them to go and be a 60-win team. I think, 2013-14, where they started off like 9-13, traded everybody, looked they were about to go for Andrew Wiggins in the tank battle, and then getting good. Like, those are the years that are fun. Those are the years that kind of stand out, the ones where expectation is low or non-existent and you overshoot them. This year, I don't even know if there's the opportunity to overshoot expectation because it hasn't really been laid out and there isn't really like a defined consensus goal. I think some folks look at this team and think it should be ready to go compete for conference finals right now. I think others look at it a little bit more sort of reasonably and say, hey, this is still a process and this is not all linear and you're not going to get year over year constant upward trajectories from everybody. That's just not how this goes down. And I think it's led to this sort of weird, ambiguous feeling of, well, what the hell are we supposed to expect from this team? And I guess, every loss is bad and makes us angry. And it just, I don't know. It hasn't been the most fun season to sort of take in so far, Katie. Do you find that as well? Like, are you finding there's a little bit more sort of angst and, just general venom in the way that people are discussing the team? I know it's not everybody. Everyone has their own sort of silos on the internet and their fan groups who kind of, inform the way you think. But I think just like the general overall impression from media, from fans, from whomever, it does feel a little bit more sort of contentious than you'd like it to be. But again, I can't really put my finger on to as exactly why that is.
I've seen the kind of malaise of the venom that you're talking about. I don't necessarily connect with it. I don't really get it.
No, it should be said, nor do I.
Yeah, no, I know you don't. It's a little bit surprising with how high stakes it feels already.
Yeah.
This is it's the beginning of December. I think we've had more good games than bad. The bad ones are frustrating because gaffes that, that last quarter of the Celtics game was a very frustrating thing to watch, right? There were some pretty amateur hour mistakes and wasted, if not just outright lost possessions. So that sucks to see. Of post-game comments being misconstrued, that the implication is they're going to trade for somebody, or that if your core players don't quote get up to a certain level, they're going to get traded, when I think it's pretty clear it's get up to a certain level just means you're that was matching them against one game against the NBA's best team of bona fide superstars working at it for years. And I don't mean their craft. I mean that Celtics team together has been we saw them kind of claw the standings and have so many disappointments and just early kind of fallouts to get here. And I think they're just they're playing with a kind of quiet determination that it's scary because they're all synced up and they're very dedicated and focused. You could kind of even just see that in their warm-ups. I don't think that's a reason to panic, though. I don't think it's a reason to be that upset. I don't think there's a chemistry problem with the team. I think everyone's really sick, for one.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about Fred VanVleet's kind of woes, seeing him in person at points of the sickness he's got and re-got. And he has kids. I feel like everyone I know who has kids is very sick right now, too, or is around kids get sick. But he looked pretty gaunt. I don't mean he lost weight in any kind of physical way. I just mean the way that sometimes when you get sick very badly for a few days, it takes it out of you. Yeah. So I think you got to factor that in. I don't think there's just some big thing of unhappiness, but what I said before, I don't think you can gloss over that. Is there are some contract questions. Everybody wants to see themselves as a big part of the team. Sometimes I think Nick Nurse doesn't necessarily do the best job of finding people's roles are, because the exercise is always who's going to fight it out for these roles, which is great to instill, I think, competition in a younger, but there's not that young of a team. So, I mean, it's aside from a handful less than of guys, I think, it's funny because I'm always why do we need a set rotation? Let's just be fluid. But watching it now, it's actually maybe a set rotation for a little while would actually help clarify.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think that's a really well taken point. I do want to get into the sort of the contract weirdness hanging over the team when it comes to Fred and Gary Trent Jr. I think at the end of the show, Katie, we'll do that. And I do want to get into sort of trying to set an actual bar for expectation that everyone can use as okay, the Locked On Raptors folks, they set what the expectation should be. We'll listen to them. We'll do that in just a second. I do want to just add one more quick point, though. I do think it's insane that it feels like the nadir of the season vibes-wise comes on the heels of a loss to a team that is just demolishing everybody in the NBA.
Yeah.
This is what the Celtics do, man. This is not, and I do think it speaks to the sort of weird undefined expectation that a loss to the Celtics is deemed as this massive failure Like, that's not the measuring stick for this team, man. That's really not. As much as you want it to be, they're not on the Celtics level. No one's on the Celtics level. And to compare yourself to them is to only ask for disappointment in the way that you assess the team. We're going to come back in just a sec, dig into what those expectations actually should be, and try to offer you a little bit of a guide as a Raptors fan. We'll do that in just 1 second. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks, who are making daily fantasy fun, easy, accessible, and right now they have a wonderful little wrinkle. You pick between 2 and 5 players on your entries. You can win up to 10 times your money if you get them all correct. Instead, now you can pick up to 6 players on your entry, and you can win up to 25 times your money if you get them all correct. Again, you're just picking against the projections more or less than the prescribed number of points, rebounds, assists, steals, whatever for any player. You can do it in any sport as well. It's not just basketball. You got the NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, all down the line. You can make your entries with players involving players from all of these different sports. It's fantastic. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Safe and fast withdrawals too, and they're currently operational in over 30 states in Canada and every province except for Ontario at the moment. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports today. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you put in $100 of your own money, $100 of Prize Picks' money is just going to appear in your account. What a wonderful deal that is. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON to get it at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 with Prize Picks. All right, we continue on here with Katie Heindl, the sentient basketball in a cowboy hat. We are digging into Toronto Raptors expectations and the sort of weird ambiguousness of them this season for the team. So we're here. We're going to present a solution. We're just going to do what the front office maybe didn't do on opening day of the season. We're going to set the baseline of expectations for this team, and thus you can get angry or happy in relation to how they're performing with that set expectation in mind. Maybe this is a silly exercise that's overestimating the reach of Locked On Raptors, but my hope is that this can bring a little bit of a relaxed note to the tone around the team at the moment. So, Katie, let me ask you. What should be the baseline level of expectation for this team this year? Is it just simply advancing to the second round? Is it a little bit more tied to the play on the floor and the sort of internal developments, individual developments? Is it role definition? Is it a bit mix of all of it? Where would you sort of set the baseline of expectation for Raptors fans? Now that we've seen 24 games, you still got plenty of time left to sort of get things back on the road. I guess it's a third of the season now. Is that it? Mm-hmm. Is that how math works? Not quite. Not quite. Either way, a third of the Tampa season where they played 72 games. I'm on it there. But no, what would you say right now, Katie, is like a fair level to set expectation at for this team for the remainder of the year to allow people to know exactly where their feelings should be, aimed if things go good or badly?
Okay. I think it's fair to have expectations of certain players. I think it's good to have, so you're like, you want Fred VanVleet to get out of this 3-point shooting slump, but you also
that would be nice.
Being like, sometimes that just happens on its own, and sometimes that is because of like where he's at and what he's being asked to do on the floor. So I think you always, expectations, I'm also like, what else is going on? So use all your senses as a basketball fan.
Taste, smell. Those are the only ones that really apply here, I think.
I think a defensive jump from Scotty, a good expectation, just even given the company that he's keeping, basically in the form of OG Anunoby. I think the team's defensive identity could be shored up some, because that's something that, this team has historically hung its hat on, but doesn't look there. They have like some really, really bright spots, but then they have these slumps. So I think some defensive consistency would be great. I would defensive consistency, but that feels like an unrealistic expectation, one, for this team, and like just two in the kind of weird, like fair winds blowing away. I think on a game-by-game basis, a good expectation to have is to win games against good teams. So you're going to want to take some. You want to I mean, ideally you want to take the next game that you play against them, but those games are always pretty good measuring sticks. It's fun to go out and like yell the Magic, but those are kind of like, those are ego wins, I feel like, rather than
get well wins.
Competent, and you need those sometimes, but like competent, okay, everybody was working pretty incisively and together, and that's why we got this win. We made some good adjustments, which is like looked so vacant in that second half of the Celtics game. Where were the adjustments? I don't know. I didn't see any.
Yeah, so the adjustment was we're just going to let Jason Tatum destroy us more, and it worked really well if that was the intention.
Celtics sure as hell adjusted, but it was on Toronto's end of things. So, you know, like, look at your opponents that you are kind of consistently, like the Celtics, you know, it's going to be a tough match. I would say even times it can be a tough match. The Bucks, you know, look around the East and think like, these are the teams that we want to actually treat as a measuring stick to bump ourselves up in terms of expectations, because like once you kind of hit these goals, you've got to be like, well, what's the next one? You can't just kind of sit and coast. I think a good season expectation that doesn't feel like a reach, but still feels like you've got to dig in and, you know, it's going to would be a second round. It would be a second round win. I would say.
Yeah, I think getting to the second round is like a really easy thing to say, hey, like if they don't do that, it's a bummer. And that said, I mean, the East is really good, and if they end up with a tough first round matchup, then maybe that changes the calculus there. That said, if they're as good as we kind of hope that they are, maybe they work themselves into a favorable matchup in the first round. So I think we won't really know, I think, like the degree of success for like the ultimate like playoff destiny of the team until we actually see how it all transpires and the sort of machinations of it. That said, I do think there's plenty of room for like setting expectation within the season. And, you know, I do think kind of role definition is one of them, right? This is a season that I've kind of been talking about as like a year where you figure out who are your guys going forward, who is going to be part of the Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam era. I think OG Anunoby has very much worked himself into that conversation. I would be shocked if he's not part of the long-term plans, considering he's an absolute demon on defense and is probably going to win. You know, he's going to make an all-defense team for sure at this point and maybe win Defensive Player of the Year. That stuff's amazing. The other parts, I think, are still a little bit left up in the air, and I think figuring out exactly the best ways to use Gary Trent Jr. and Fred VanVleet, and, you know, eventually when Precious Achiuwa gets back, Precious Achiuwa, figuring out how those guys fit into the mix, I think is a really important part of this year, because you don't just have forever to be patient and keep on running it back. Money is going to become a conversation. Contracts are up in the air. As soon as this summer, you kind of have some actual answers and some sort of solutions here. And I do think it's got to be on Nick Nurse to try to figure out the sort of the hierarchy of the team going forward, figure out which guys are the ones worth sort of investing in long term, and figure out which ones are maybe ones you're going to move on from. And I think that's a big part of sort of what Nick Nurse has got to contend with this year. As far as like performing well against good teams, I do think this is kind of being forgotten. They've done pretty well in that department, right? They're 2-1 against the Heat. They're 1-1 against the Hawks, but they almost beat the Hawks without any of their guys, and were hilariously good in that game that they almost won with no one available. And they're 2-0 against the Cavs. Like they've been good against their contemporaries for the most part, and they haven't played the Bucks yet. I don't think they've played the Sixers. They played the Sixers once, or no, they played them twice the first week. Never mind. And they're 1-1 there. So yeah, it's a weird mixed bag in that there's been a lot of good so far this year, Katie. They're 12-12. Like, they've had some really good moments and high spots, and Pascal's been incredible. The individual performances from him and OG in particular have been really thrilling to behold. Thad Young's been a nice story. I guess it's just sort of the overall direction of the team feels a little bit more up in the air and more of a question. But yeah, it's... And look, I don't know if we actually did the job of setting expectations here. Second round or bust, I guess. It's a hard thing to do.
And like, not to delve too deep into like this like psychological side of it, but I always kind of wonder, like, you know, a championship in some ways is a closed book, like and it does open up some kind of like new hopes and expectations, but the Raptors got the championship, then you've got like an abrupt, like you've got COVID and you've got the bubble, then you've got Tampa. Like there are all these kind of like false starts, I want to say. And I could see maybe how fans, or like maybe new fans, especially when you're like, oh, I'm just used to this team being good. It's one thing to then a bad team, but then it's one thing to switch to a season that like absolutely seems to make no sense. And that's been happening for a while now. So I get the kind of like malaise tied to fan fatigue. What I don't get is like the anger, because I don't really know what there is to be mad at. Some of the times I'm like, is it just betting, rotting people's brains? But that's its own whole can of worms. But anyway, like I just I think it's good to be fluid. It's good expectations, but like they do have to be realistic. And like this team was not this team. You want to be a regular season contender, but this team is like there's their eyes on the trophy. The way that like you watch that Celtics team play, and they have like gritted it out.
They got Larry O'B's in their eyes. Yeah, they're like lighting up like dollar signs.
Yeah.
The Celtics are going to win the championship, Katie. I hate it. They're clearly going to
win
it,
though. I will also
They're
say,
so good.
as a prelude to the next segment, Celtics had some salary stuff hanging over the team last season. It has since been clarified, and look at how fluid they seem altogether.
Yeah. Let's take a quick beat. We'll come back on the other side, dig into Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. And I think their contract situations, and you know how they're sort of hanging over the team. Maybe they aren't. I don't really know. We're going to dig into it. It's a very, as we talked about on yesterday's show, which you were a listener of. We really appreciate that, Katie. Just really, really hard to sort of pin down the woes of this team at the moment, because again, I don't think there are as many as maybe it's perceived there are, and so we're kind of like trying to pin down things that don't exist. But also the contract stuff is a very ethereal thing and kind of maybe creeps into the corners of the team in ways you don't expect. We're gonna get to that in just one sec, round of the show, but first I want to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for sports betting, info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer. World Cup's going on. It's a lot of fun. It's coming home, baby. Put some money down on the Brits on Saturday. Why not? Against the French. And they'll tell you exactly what you should be doing, your individual player props, all that stuff. You're going to get the full picture of how to be the informed wagerer when you go to betonline.net and soak in all of their wonderful content. They got podcasts to give you the details. They got injury reports, all sorts of analysis and news. Go check them out. They are the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. And rounding out our chat about expectations with our dear friend Katie Heindl, who we expect to be fantastic every time she's on the show, and she is. So good job to you, Katie. Contract stuff. Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr. Let's start with Fred, shall we? Because the vibes around Fred are really bizarre. You know, I still think he's part of the team's long-term plans. Like he, as much as he isn't 6'9" and a wing, he brings a lot of stuff to this team. He's got institutional knowledge. He's just so steeped in the way the Raptors do things and carry themselves and build. And it would be weird, I think, if like the next iteration of this team didn't involve Fred VanVleet. That said, I feel like a lot of people are now starting to consider, you know, potential outcomes where Fred VanVleet is not on the team beyond this season. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll keep him around. But where are you at right now with Fred, and how do you think this, you know, you're around the team more than I am this season. I don't know if it's actually been like a topic of conversation that you've come across, but where do you think this whole Fred contract limbo kind of fits into the story of the team so far this season? Is it part of it? Is it non-existent? Is it weighing on guys the more Fred VanVleet starts to struggle? Is it weighing on the team? Like, I'm having a hard time with this one, Katie. Again, having a hard time with a lot of things with this team right now. Is it's very weird and kind of messy and not at all sort of black and white.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say, you know, Fred's like a very thoughtful person, so I think it's certainly like it's in his mind. It is like hanging over his head, and one of the, you know, many, I'm sure, like thousands of things he's on a day-to-day basis. But to say it's like weighing on him, I'm not sure, because I think there's a mutual understanding and a mutual respect between the front office and Fred that they've established up to now, similarly to what they did with Kyle Lowry. So I think understanding that he could go out and decide to see, who might make him an offer. But I also feel like there's conversations that have probably been had where it's like, here's like kind of what we need from you. And like, that you have then in turn an offer that looks like this from like between Fred and his agent and the team. I do think things like that get worked out between franchises and franchise players, as much as like people still seem really admit that Fred VanVleet is, but franchise players well in advance, like he is a cornerstone of the franchise. As you said, he has institutional knowledge. I think it's even very big of him in the ways he will joke around about like how he is a misfit on the team now. But the fact that like he can talk about this openly, I think like obviously speaks to acceptance and the understanding of his role going way beyond like the physical makeup of the team on the floor. So that to me seems more assured. I think if anything, Fred's just probably down on himself because he knows he hasn't been playing that well. And like he's his harshest critic, right? And he'll be the first to that. So I could see that being like a really tough thing weighing on him. The Gary Trent Jr. Thing is less clear to me because of me thinks he may want to go out and see who might offer him something. I don't know like what team that would be, because something I also think happens. We see these players like day in, day out. We really like celebrate them, obviously, and we know and see what they're capable of. But I do feel like there's still this bubble effect of the team up here, and like other front offices, maybe not necessarily, or they're just like, if we're talking about a trade deadline situation, they're going to just be like, what can you give us in the right now? Because like you change our pathway to winning and like playoff contention or not. Because like even the Raptors have made midseason moves. That's what it's been for, right? So I wonder on like the immediacy of Gary Trent Jr. impact somewhere else. I guess I also did wonder about it too, just because of the comments that Nick Nurse made. Just in terms
which
of
he seems to have responded to pretty damn well. I don't know. Yeah, like he's been good off the bench.
He's playing super disruptive, like on the defensive end of the floor, which has been really cool to see. I mean, I would only assume he keeps, because again, like he's got his contract on his mind. So I don't think I wouldn't say with this team that it's like certainly putting a wedge in there, but it would be kind of oblivious to say it doesn't affect them in some way. People, it's like guys are aware of it, it's like, can also get along and have their like, collegial and closer relationships, but there's definitely an awareness around it.
Yeah, for me, I would say I don't get the sense that the team is like being weighed down by the contract limbo for a couple other guys. I do think, however, that the contract limbo for Fred and Gary Trent Jr., who again both have player options this offseason, they may just opt in. I mean, at this rate, Fred might opt in. He's shooting like 32% or whatever. So maybe he just opts into his 22 mil and tries to come back to free agency the year after that. But I do think, because it feels like there's a limited runway to kind of know and get clear answers on these guys and like what their long-term sort of fit in the team is, I do think that adds to sort of the angst a little bit, because like we're 2.5 months away from the trade deadline. Some of these decisions are going to have to be made before then, and that adds like a bit of heaviness to it all that I think maybe Raptors fans were immune from last year, where nothing was heavy at all because it was just so happy and fun and new and novel. This year it's a little bit more of like this is a team with expectation, however ambiguous it might be. This is more, there's more riding on this team now than there was last year. And I think all of these different factors kind of come into play. One thing I do want to sort of get off my chest before we get out of here, though, Katie, is that I know when you're in the Raptors bubble, it feels like things are falling down and everything's insane. The whole league right now makes no sense. Every team is going through this, it seems. The Warriors had an awful start. They turned things around. The Nuggets are having like team meetings, and Bones Highland is talking about how the locker room's frustrated for like a 14-9 team that keeps losing weird games, but is ultimately very good. You have weird teams still high in the standings. You've got weird teams low in the standings. Nothing makes sense this NBA season, and so I feel like maybe we're building too much out of the Raptors and making too much meaning out of their struggles. It's everyone's going through it. And I don't think the Raptors are special in this regard, I guess is how I'd frame it. Do you agree with that as well, Katie? Like, is this maybe sort of a we're in this silo and everything seems like it's pandemonium, but actually it's just kind of, standard for what's going on across the entire league this year?
Yeah, it's a super weird season so far. I think a lot of things feel not clear, which is kind of cool because like league wide, it just means like there's a lot of room for excitement and upsets and like unknowns, which like, as a basketball fan, I mind. It obviously sucks when you get a bit granular if it comes down to your team. And as we've been talking about this whole time, what the expectations are. But I think league wide, a lot has started strangely. I don't want to say like on the wrong foot, but certainly like not on the foot you'd expect. Lakers think it's the wrong foot. But it's like led to the Sacramento Kings playing like
light the beam.
Yeah, it's brought us the beam. You have like Bol and like most improved player contention, which I think is really cool. Like you've got the Jazz like just playing against it seems like basketball for themselves, right? And like Portland quietly being excellent. So I think within all that, where the Raptors are, which is like honestly kind of in the middle, you've got like a split record.
Everyone's 500. Games. Everyone.
Yeah. You've got more good games than bad under and there's really no reason to think this team won't improve. Also, like we didn't even talk about injuries. It's still a deep list of.
They've had a lot of injuries. They've had a lot of them. It's crazy. They're getting healthy early. Now, but man.
Yeah. Like earlier than any other team, I'd say like late season injuries, like kind of a situation there for a little while, but we're coming out of that. So I think you got to take it all. It's tried, and just expectation should be like onward and upward from here.
Yeah, and I made this point yesterday, but I just feel like it's worth remembering. We've all seen NBA seasons before, right? Like we know that there are ups and downs. We know it's not always wonderful the entire way through. It never is. And I feel like to overreact to an early December lull, it feels like you're like going to drive yourself insane. Just remember the way things have happened in recent years. They were below 500 at this point last year, if I recall. They were below 500 and like really started 2-8 in the Tampa season before clawing all the way back to 4th in the East before the team got ransacked by COVID, right? Like there are beats and rhythms to a season, and it feels like every time we're in those beats and rhythms, it's the end of the world and this has never happened before. No, this happens every year. Like, it's fine. Not to, use my tag phrase or anything like that, but like it really is like in the grand scheme, it feels weird and just kind of like a little off right now, but like you got a couple of get well wins against the Magic this weekend and things are looking very, very different. Katie, this has been lovely. It's been wonderful to talk to you, the sentient basketball with a cowboy hat today. Anything you would like to promote for the good people out there that the sentient cowboy basketball with the cowboy hat has written of late?
I was going to say it's been funny to like have some pretty sincere insight. Like, this is who's talking. But,
Katie, what's the meaning of life? Take it away.
I think what was I going to say? I wrote this has passed, but you can still see the work, and it's actually gone on for sale on the Bleacher Report's store. But I interviewed an artist named Matthew McCormick, who is just like a very cool contemporary artist I've loved for a really long time, but very fun thing with the NBA and Bleacher Report for Miami Art Week. The exhibition just closed this past Sunday, but as I mentioned, the work is all the shop there, and you can look at it. You can also read the article on Dime, because that's the more interesting thing. I'm not just trying to plug merch, because I don't get anything from that. The story, and then you can also subscribe and read and listen to Basketball Feelings at basketballfeelings.com.
Everyone go do that as a basketball feeling subscriber. Could not possibly recommend it more. You can find me at Woodley Sean on Twitter. Follow, subscribe to, rate, review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I promise there will be newsletter posts coming at some point here. I've been very busy, and it's not the top of my priority list, unfortunately, to write blog posts for my newsletter, but there will be stuff coming. I promise. Once I get some clarity over the Christmas holidays, I think we'll be in good shape. Either way, this is just me talking through my own issues on the podcast. Please go and support the show on YouTube and do all that good stuff. Subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, all that. And we will round it there. Go make your second listen of the day, Locked On Sports Today, as Pete Bukowski runs through all the big stories from the day before in the world of sports. And it's really, really great. So go check it out, and we'll round it there. We'll talk to you again tomorrow to break down Raptors-Lakers for another episode of Locked On Raptors. Bye-bye.